James Bell here, the Boxing Source, and we are here with another video. And this one is to talk about a follow up from the fight that happened over 2 weeks ago, November 2nd, Las Vegas. Sergey Kovalev, Canelo Alvarez for the WBO Light Heavyweight Championship. We know that Canelo Alvarez ended up winning that bout to become a four-division world champion. Was able to win by emphatic knockout of Sergey Kovalev. Now the talk has been floating around that Kovalev had basically taken the money and ran and basically cashed out in his fight against Canelo Alvarez. And this has kind of been flaming up here over the past few days. Is we kind of like saying that Kovalev basically went through the motions in his fight against Canelo Alvarez, basically just throwing a jab and not really following up with that jab over the course of the fight, not really throwing many shots with emphasis. The power shots didn't really have everything behind it. In that he just, allowed Canelo Alvarez to get through with the power shots that Canelo Alvarez got in that particular fight. You saw that Canelo Alvarez, over the course of the fight, mainly threw a lot of power shots, or power shots that had a lot of emphasis behind them, in comparison to Kovalev, who didn't really put in, or didn't seem to put in, everything behind his punches. So it just like seemed for a lot of maybe Canelo detractors or whatever it is, that Kovalev just went through the motions and was just there to make Canelo look good, and got knocked out. But basically what came out of there, he was able to get up and stay pretty much after the fight, and you'll have comments after the fight. Did get checked out in the hospital, whatever it is, but he was there to basically get the payday that he got, which was maybe in the range of $7 to $9 million. Therefore, his fight against Canelo Alvarez. If you trace back to Kovalev's previous fight, when he fought Anthony Yard, and he was able to get that win over Anthony Yard, the overall reaction to that was that they celebrated that particular fight because, you had him basically setting himself up for that fight with Canelo Alvarez. They didn't have anything else lined up for Canelo Alvarez at that particular point, due to the fallout with what happened with the IBF middleweight championship, with Canelo getting stripped of that IBF middleweight title, him not being able to put a fight together with Demetrius Andrade to have a unification bout, including the WBO middleweight championships. So that fight between Canelo Alvarez and Sergey Kovalev was pretty much a backup plan, since they didn't have anything scheduled for September for Canelo Alvarez, which is usually when Canelo has his fights, either May and September of the calendar year. But since they didn't have anything for September of this calendar year, that's when they ended up scheduling the fight between Canelo Alvarez and Sergey Kovalev for November 2nd. But you just didn't necessarily see Sergey Kovalev really put much into his punches in his fight with Canelo Alvarez. But that doesn't, I wouldn't say take away from what Canelo Alvarez was able to do. But you still have those questions out there as to why Sergey Kovalev didn't necessarily approach the fight like he had approached previous fights. for me, I just think that Kovalev was on the downturn of his career. If you saw his performance with Anthony Yard, um, he was basically not being able to move around the ring that well against Anthony Yard. He did, utilize his jab, but most of the other power shots weren't necessarily there. The younger guy in Anthony Yard was able to take a good amount of those punches and throw back. It was just the endurance that befell Anthony Yard late in that particular fight, and which had the fight end in a TKO or stoppage victory in the 11th round there for Sergey Kovalev to get that win and retain the WBO title at that particular point. But against Canelo Alvarez, it just didn't seem like he was, completely into the fight, even though the fight itself seemed like it was a lot closer than it ended up being with the emphatic knockout by Canelo Alvarez. But I just feel that Sergey Kovalev didn't really give his all in his particular fight against Canelo Alvarez, and that's where the whole thing about him basically cashing out kind of like comes up, particularly where, if you trace back to his previous fight against Anthony Yard, with him getting the win over Anthony Yard, he, alongside Kathy Duva, were the most excited about that particular result, because they knew that with that win, they locked down that fight between Kovalev and Canelo Alvarez in order for him to basically get the biggest payday of his career. So that's what I have there in that particular topic. You can subscribe to the Boxing Source on YouTube. You can also catch the Boxing Source radio show live on Blog Talk Radio, or catch the podcast on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever your favorite podcast app is. On that note, folks, I'm out. Peace.